Good afternoon. Thank you for being here once again. We'll continue to do these as long as you respond and as long as they're of value to you. I did want to mention a couple things, actually 3 things today. First off, last time I talked about the bonus for new recruits to come into the city, which is either $1,000 or $2,000 if you're a trained officer in Virginia. We also have instituted, and I alluded to this last time, a bonus, a benefit for police officers. Anyone in the police department that's not directly involved in recruiting that does successfully recruit an officer will get a bonus. We've instituted that. It's in place now. $1,000 for anyone who recruits someone who goes through the police class and is successful, and $2,000 for any officer that recruits an existing law enforcement officer certified in Virginia. We believe this is going to give an added incentive. Our police officers have friend police officers, and we're hopeful that we can really help build up our force and really address the issue that's significant. Second is, last week, I'm the chair of a regional group of city and county managers, and all of us have been very concerned about the level of violent crime that's happening in the entire metropolitan area. It is certainly not just Newport News. In fact, other cities have an even more significant problem than we do. So we met last week in an extended meeting, a retreat setting, to talk about those things which have been successful in different cities and counties throughout our area and things they knew beyond that. So as a way to try to get at everything we can be doing to be successful in addressing the issues of too many shootings and too many homicides in Newport News. One of the things that grew out of that was a recognition, I think, that I have at least, and that others in the city beyond the police department have, about how we need to even ramp up further our engagement in the community. So we're going to be putting some things together. I've had some preliminary conversations with the chief where we can be helpful and supportive to the community. And that's going to be really vitally important, so people clearly know we care, clearly know that we're going to do everything we can do to make a difference. So those were my introductory remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to Chief Myers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's Keeping Newport News Safe briefing. Today we're going to focus on the tremendous challenge of gun violence. As you've heard me say before, in some of our neighborhoods, it's become almost normalized for people to carry handguns or have easy access to them, regardless of the legality. It's unacceptable that juveniles can readily get their hands on a gun. And it's also unacceptable that previously convicted felons often readily arm themselves with guns. In past briefings, we pointed out that in many of our shootings and homicides, there was a relationship between the offender and the victim. Adding a gun in the middle of this relationship often results in violence. And this is why we are so intensely focused on getting dangerous weapons off the streets to prevent their illegal use. Near the end of this briefing, we'll share some statistics for you on our overall numbers for both last year and our results so far this year. We want to acknowledge that we're trying to better inform our community of the dangers of guns on the street. And I want to especially thank Captain Eric Randall and his officers in the South Precinct for demonstrating the value of social media in reporting out the results of their great work in seizing illegal guns. So far in 2017, South Precinct officers and officers in other parts of the city as well have been aggressively getting guns off the street, and Captain Randall often shares this info with the hashtag Keeping Newport News Safe. You may have seen some of these recent tweets from precinct captains. If you haven't already, might we suggest that you follow our precinct captains on Twitter. They use the Twitter handles at NNPD South, at NNPD Central, and at NNPD North. We're using these tweets to highlight our officers to keep the streets of Newport News safe by removing illegal firearms. Throughout this presentation, we're going to highlight a number of cases where our officers worked quickly to take firearms off the streets of Newport News and out of the hands of dangerous people. So let's dive into some of the cases. 5800 block of Jefferson Avenue on January 30th, officers responded to a single vehicle accident. The driver of the vehicle fled on foot, and officers recovered all of the items listed on the slide. For those who can't see it easily, 110 grams of suspected crack cocaine divided into 9 plastic baggies, 15 grams of suspected marijuana, a scale, a ballistic vest, a Sig Sauer P250 handgun slide, and a .40 Smith & Wesson handgun barrel, and a Sig Sauer hand grip to a pistol, so all parts to handguns, several .40 caliber bullets, 2 cell phones, and miscellaneous cash. On January 31st, officers responded to 12th Street and Ivy for a report of an individual with a gun. Officers arrived and spotted a man matching the description and spoke with him, but they did not observe a firearm. The man entered a nearby business, and after leaving the business, a firearm was located on the counter where this person was standing. The firearm came back as stolen out of the city of Hampton. Now, detectives, in following up, reviewed security footage from the business and saw the subject in question hand the firearm to the store clerk, and the clerk wouldn't take it. So he left the firearm on the counter where detectives located it. Next slide. On January 27th, an officer working extra duty in the 1200 block of Garden Drive heard a single gunshot coming from the area of 2 vehicles. Officers conducted a traffic stop in the area of 12th Street and Ivy. There were 3 subjects inside the vehicle. 1 suspect fled on foot, and 2 others were detained. One of the subjects, 24-year-old Michael Tavon Moore, had an outstanding capias from Hampton for a probation violation on a robbery. Officers checked the vehicle and located a loaded Ruger 10-22 rifle and a loaded pistol with the hammer cocked and the safety off. Mr. Moore was taken into custody and charged with the outstanding probation violation and possession by a felon of a firearm. Now, I want you to note on the picture, I'm not sure how clearly you can see that pistol. It's bright blue in color. This is an example of what is euphemistically called a designer gun. And someone in the community might mistake this gun as a toy. Our officers don't have the luxury of assuming that it is a toy. And in this case, it is, in fact, a deadly firearm, just as capable of killing as a traditionally colored gun. And while some argue that the current laws pertaining to facsimile guns requiring a bright orange tip on the end of the barrel clearly marks them as toys, we've seen such guns with the orange tips cut off and used in robberies and assaults. Similarly, we've seen real handguns where the tip of the barrel has been painted bright orange to make it look more like a toy gun. And we've all heard the stories, cities all over the country, police officers having to make life and death decisions on whether to shoot or not when presented with such deadly force. And the whole designer gun, toy gun, facsimile debate only makes that more challenging. Next slide. On January 29th, citizens called our dispatch to report a female with a firearm and shots fired. Officers arrived on scene and detained 27-year-old Tiandra Shaw of Williamsburg. They located a firearm lying in the grass near her. Ms. Shaw stated she fired the weapon in response to an argument she had with another female, and she received criminal summons for discharging a firearm without bodily harm and a firearm concealed by a protective order subject. Next slide. The 800 block of 32nd Street. On January 20th, officers approached Michael Washington after seeing him drive a vehicle while on a suspended driver's license. While speaking with him, officers observed a firearm concealed on his person. A .40 caliber Smith & Wesson was recovered and taken from Mr. Washington because he did not have a concealed carry permit. On January 26th, officers on patrol in the area of Riverland Drive attempted to speak with 3 males. One of the males, a 17-year-old juvenile, fled from the officers on foot. He was pursued, and the officers witnessed him discard something into a bush. The officers were able to detain him and located a firearm in the bush. He was subsequently charged with possession of a firearm by a juvenile, reckless handling of a firearm, and littering. And he was taken to secure detention. On January 29th, officers responded to the 1300 block of 25th Street for property damage. A landlord had noticed bullet holes in the front of his residence when he came to the residence to inspect it. And a male who was not a tenant but had been staying at the home was moving out his belongings. Officers entered the residence and located shell casings on the floor and damage consistent with bullet holes inside the residence, and they also found shell casings on the outside of the residence. A firearm was located in a room upstairs that came back as stolen. Upon further search, officers located suspected crack cocaine, a scale, packaging material, and 40 counterfeit DVDs. 33-year-old Matthew Threat was taken into custody and charged with the offenses on the slide. Now, you may have noticed there's often a correlation between the presence of guns and drugs or other contraband. In this case, there were illegal drugs present, packaging and distribution materials, as well as counterfeit DVDs, all indicative of criminal enterprise. Those engaged in criminal enterprise often armed themselves as part of doing their business. On January 28th, a citizen notified officers about a felon in possession of a handgun in the area of 34th Street. Officers arrived and located the male matching the description given, where he fled into a residence. Police were given permission to search the residence and recovered a black handgun wrapped in a pair of pants in one bedroom and a Sig Sauer P229 pistol in another bedroom. DeMonte Leon Brown was taken into custody and charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Again, this case arose from a concerned citizen contacting us about a felon in possession of a gun. This is exactly the kind of citizen involvement and participation that can make a huge difference in our community. On January 26, citizens reported hearing multiple gunshots in the 700 block of 35th Street. When officers arrived, citizens on scene told them 2 subjects involved had fled into a nearby apartment. Officers located the subjects and obtained a search warrant on the residence. The tenant of the apartment was home with small children present at the time. During the search, officers located multiple handguns, including a pistol reported stolen, a loaded shotgun, oxycodone, suspected marijuana, small bags of suspected crack cocaine wrapped individually, and a large source bag of suspected crack cocaine. The 2 males, Timothy Eugene Jordan and Van Julian Overby III, were arrested for outstanding warrants, and the female, Arvette Lynette Booth, was taken into custody and charged with multiple offenses. In addition to seeing that combination of guns and drugs that I talked about, here we have the presence of small children within this environment. To me, putting children at risk in an environment like this is unconscionable. And we're very, very grateful that community members helped us identify this dangerous situation and intervene in it. This slide demonstrates the monthly totals for January of this year. 64 firearms removed from the streets. Also at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the breakdown of weapons offenses reports by precinct. Now, what is a weapon offense? You understand, I'm sure, that our police department, like all departments around the country, operate within a framework that's defined by the state and federal governments on how crimes are classified. Weapons offense as a category covers all the incidents that occur with a weapon that aren't otherwise included in a different category. So weapons offenses, for example, do not include homicides, aggravated assault, and brandishing, charges that have a specific category. They would include violations of carrying concealed weapon permits, or a common call for us, a report of shots fired, and officers get on scene and they find evidence and are able to secure that evidence, but there are no other charges that arise from it. So that explains the category weapon offenses. Next slide. This slide provides the same data for summary of 2016. Note that over 500 firearms were removed from the streets of Newport News last year. And again, you can see just under 900 weapon offense cases reported. I think there's a point that needs to be made about these numbers. If you have listened to some of the national narrative about police officers over the last couple of years, you've heard the police described as trigger happy and quick to use force. I want to point out that last year, with over 500 firearms submitted and almost 1,000 weapon offenses documented, officers from Newport News only had to resort to the use of deadly force twice, 2 times. In both cases, the suspects were armed and failed to obey officers' commands to drop their weapons. Both offenders survived the use of force by officers. To me, this reflects an incredible level of restraint and professionalism, as well as the quality training received by our officers. I am very proud of the collective work of our officers in securing dangerous weapons with minimal force, and the community should be just as proud. Now, to remind our friends in the media about those two incidents, the first was within moments after a double homicide that had occurred, and officers immediately began pursuing a fleeing suspect whose gun went off once while the interaction occurred with the officers, and that remains an open case at this time. The second incident was reported to you through a press release on March 30th when officers responded at 1:50 in the morning to a report of a suicidal subject indicating he was going to commit suicide by cop. Our department had had 10 prior incidents with that subject in 2016, and while establishing a perimeter on the scene, 2 officers came in contact with the subject armed with an AR-15 rifle. He also had a handgun on his person. He was wearing a ballistic vest, and the officers challenged him, commanded him to drop his weapon, and when he didn't, there was 1 round fired by an officer, and he was taken into custody and taken to the hospital. So again, when you think of the big picture of the number of incidents and the number of guns, to me it's nothing short of remarkable that our officers have been able to accomplish this safely, without injury to themselves or members of the community, only having to resort to the use of force twice. It's also been reported accurately that the 2 cities of Newport News and Hampton's police agencies are the single biggest contributors to alcohol, tobacco, and firearms interstate automated ballistic imaging network, known as NIBIN, within the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, last month, officials from both agencies visited the Norfolk Crime Lab, which is our current source of NIBIN analysis, to learn more about how the system works and to discuss the feasibility of obtaining this technology here on the peninsula. I am extremely grateful that the city leadership from both communities are supportive of us acquiring a NIBIN workstation and providing the necessary training and supporting technology so that later this year we can begin conducting our own preliminary NIBIN analysis. We believe this will expedite our generation of leads and the ability to link guns to specific crimes and specific criminals. Finally, I want to again acknowledge the outstanding cooperation between our agency and the 2 prosecutor offices who help us to hold dangerous criminals who use firearms illegally accountable for their actions. Our local Commonwealth Attorney, Howard Gwynn, and the local U.S. Attorney's Office, led by Mr. Howard Zlotnick, are very proactive and collaborative in identifying which path to take of the prosecution of gun violations. Our investigator assigned to the ATF task force is relentless in pursuing federal gun charges when appropriate. And this team approach continues to result in dramatic prosecutions. We want the people who possess firearms with criminal intent to know we work with local state, and federal laws to ensure significant consequences so that we can continue to keep Newport News safe.